Of all of South Africa's famed wine areas, and there are many, this is not just the most historic, but it's also the one with, I think, the greatest sense of romance. Writers for centuries have been speaking of the Constantia Valley, and I've been writing about it for pretty much since I started writing about food and wine, partly because I love it, but also because if you look over my broad shoulder and work your way down the valley, about 2-3 kilometres from here is the apartment that I called home for many years when I still lived in Cape Town. So coming back to this part of the world is always a nostalgic visit. It's also one that is particularly pleasant when I'm doing what I'm about to do now, which is hang out with a very cool winemaker and drink a selection of old wine. Justin, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Thank you. Thanks, and yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
It's a dreadful place you have to work here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very nice place. It's actually great to get out of the winery. You know, March, the weather is typically, you know, sunshine, no wind. It's the perfect sort of harvesting weather, and when you're stuck in the cellar, yeah, it's really nice to get out and enjoy some wine, actually. That's what I'm looking forward to.
As am I. Yeah, let's set the scene for this wine, though, before we get into it and get into it with relish. It's beautiful. It doesn't need me to reinforce that. The Constantia Valley is utterly charming. But talk to us from a wine perspective. Set aside the aesthetic. What is it about this valley that allows you to consistently make such devastatingly good wine?
Sure. So, I mean, Constantia it's the oldest wine producing region, as you said, in South Africa. I also think it's one of the coolest regions in South Africa. It's only 9 kilometers to False Bay. The predominant wind direction in the summer is the southeaster, so that comes straight off False Bay. It basically cools us down in summer. So a very cool wine growing region with a very strong sort of ocean or maritime influence. And what that results in is wines that have bright fruit and real fresh acidity. So I think that comes through in the wines. And I suppose that lends itself to Sauvignon Blanc. In the Constantia Valley, 45–50% of the vineyards in the valley are planted to Sauvignon Blanc. And the other variety that we grow on the farm in terms of white is semillon. So this is our blend of Sauvignon Blanc and semillon. And we've got 4 vintages for you to try.
And one of them is a little older, which I'm particularly excited about, and they're all sitting here demanding to be tried. For you as a winemaker, I know every winemaker has the occasional preference, particular styles of wine or particular grapes. I know you make this one with a great deal of excitement and enthusiasm. What is it about the Sauvignon Semillon blend that really appeals to you?
I think what really appeals to me is that the 2 varieties work so well together. Sauvignon Blanc has this real zesty, sort of edgy acidity, and Semillon has a much sort of broader texture, mellowed acidity, and the 2 varieties on their own, they are obviously very particular, but I just think the blend thereof, and especially you know, using barrel fermentation and aging in these vessels, it gives you a lot more texture, elegance. It pretty much, for me, I always describe it as the sum is greater than the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
And we haven't even had a glass of wine yet.
Not yet.
What state are we going to be in? Well, all right. So these are the 4 of them. The first one goes back to 2013. I was trying to remember 2013. I'd been married for a couple of years, hadn't started a wine show, hadn't even started the Dan Nichols show at that stage. So it was a while back. Where were you 8 years ago?
I was here, but yeah, also hadn't had any children yet. But
those were wonderful days. I mean, no, they were terrible days. Aidan Aaron, if you're watching, Daddy didn't mean that.
Yeah, pre-children era. So so no, I was here. I started here in 2012 as the winemaker. I was actually here since 2008 as the assistant. So no, I mean, I've been here a good 12 years, and I think what this tasting will show you is that, you know, it really is a case of not really showing you a specific vintage or vintage variation. It's showing you what we can produce from these 2 varieties on this estate. And I think hopefully you find some sort of consistency in the style and consistency in the quality of the product. So
all right, well, let's go back to 2013. This is the first one. Tell me a little bit about the vintage, what made it special.
2013, I'm showing you this one on purpose. Hey. It was a spectacular vintage for this wine. It was only the third year of producing our Constantia Glen 2. Yeah, it's a blend of 70% Sauvignon Blanc, 30% Semillon. And yeah, it was just a phenomenal vintage, I think, for Sauvignon Blanc and for the white varieties in general. We got an amazing concentration, and what we got in that year, which we don't always get, is we actually get a little bit of botrytis on our Semillon. So we don't get that every year, and I think that little bit of botrytis actually creates a slightly sort of different character in the wine, and often it's not, for me, it's not always detrimental. It can add a certain quality and a bit of life and character to the wine. So yeah.
We do have a lot of people who watch the show who are early on in their wine journey. Some will have heard of botrytis. Go, hang on, isn't that a disease or a fungus? And others won't know what botrytis is at all.
Okay.
Just explain that very quickly, and then why it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, so botrytis is a fungal infection. Yes, it is. But what it does is it dehydrates the berry. So actually, it's also called noble rot. And all noble late harvest wines are made from fully botrytized grapes. So grapes that are fully infected with botrytis. If you have the odd berry slipping in, making a dry style like this, it obviously gives you a slightly elevated sugar, so what botrytis does is it dehydrates the berry. So basically, what you're left with is sugar, and the water is removed, and concentrates the acidity, concentrates the flavor. It does impart, a slight sort of sweet character, I suppose, to the wine, but in small quantities, it can be quite appealing. Yeah.
All right. So it's a good kind of fungal disease, as opposed to the one you get when you come back from that bachelor party in Thailand, where you kind of don't want.
I haven't done that.
None of us have. All right. So this is 2013. All right. Introduce us to the wine. What am I having here?
Yeah. So, like I said, 70% Sauvignon Blanc, 30% Semillon, all fermented in 600-liter barrels. And I think it's just for an 8-year-old wine, you're still getting freshness, you're still getting that sort of flinty minerality, and it's bright, and there's lots of yellow fruit, and lots of limes and peach, white peach. So I think it's just I mean, and also if you compare it to the others, there's very little color development.
Yeah, I'm a little
in 8 years.
surprised there. I thought it might have that slightly more golden hue to it, but it's remained very clean. And it's amazing how often at the moment I'm drinking an older wine, red or white, from South Africa, and the word fresh comes up, and that we're retaining that youthfulness in so many of our wines far longer than people might suspect.
Yeah, I think it was actually a movement around about 10 years ago where, there was a movement towards making more serious wines, and wines that actually were probably harder to drink in their youth, but certainly have more potential to age. Acidity is paramount in this style of wine, so acidity is very important to allow the wine to age. We never have a problem with acidity in Constantia, especially in a vintage like this one, the 2021 harvest. It's a really late vintage. One of the latest we've had, and sky high acids, which I mean, we have to deal with it to a certain degree in the winemaking process, but we can do that. And what it means is that you make wines with longevity and freshness. And I think the one word synonymous with Constantia is freshness.
I'd have almost no chance of picking that as being as old as it is if I were to drink it blind, because it does taste so, which suggests to me that although it is now 8 years into its journey, it's certainly not a journey that's finished.
No, certainly not. I mean, this 2013 it was also a vintage that sort of cemented the idea of making this one of our flagship wines. 2013 got 2 trophies in the UK the year after we made it, at the IWC and at the Decanter World Wine Awards. It got the trophy for the South African white wine. So yeah, I think that got us very excited about the style and about making more of this wine. So
Which, of course, you have in every
yeah.
passing year. So let's move on to wine number 2. And you've set a pretty high standard with the 2013. What can we expect 4 years later from 2017?
Yeah, 2017. Yeah, cracker of a vintage, especially for the red wines. And I just think in 2017, what we have is something really mineral, very saline, slightly more savory. I'm really excited about how the 2017 will age and develop, whether it will surpass what the 2013 has done. But I think just a spectacular vintage. It's got elegance, it's got depth, it's got very little color development. This wine, it feels like this wine is just stable and not not going anywhere.
It's very grown up for a 4-year-old. You mentioned the first one was 70-30. Is it always that case?
It's always roughly that. Sometimes it's like 69. This one is 68% Sauvignon Blanc, 32% Semillon. So it's always roughly, it just depends whether it's 68 or 71, depends on the barrel makeup of that particular vintage. I want Sauvignon Blanc to still be the shining sort of star of the wine. I think Sauvignon Blanc has, it's got so much drive and so much acidity, and rather have the Semillon as the supporting component. So that's one factor. The other factor is that we only have one vineyard of Semillon on the property.
Purely incidental.
So there's only 1 hectare thereof, which obviously limits the amount of Semillon that we have on the farm. And all the wines that we produce under the Constantia Glen range are estate wines. Yeah, I think that wine's still a baby. I think it's really got many years ahead of it. Just real elegance and depth. I don't think it's got the sort of tropical notes that you get on the 13, but certainly a lot more complexity, and there's quite a bit happening there.
I remember giving this wine to a friend of mine who enjoys wine, certainly not a wine expert, but enjoys wine within the narrowest of parameters, only drinks Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay.
And I gave her a glass of this, and she complimented me on what an excellent Sauvignon Blanc it was. So for those people, and they're certainly out there, there are plenty of people who Sauvignon Blanc is what they've grown up on, that's what they drink, that's what they like. This is a lovely way to take the next step along and just broaden that palate ever so slightly.
Yeah, it is. I think it certainly is. I mean, there's no, when you drink the wine, there's no doubting that it is Sauvignon Blanc character. It's based on Sauvignon Blanc, and yeah, by that I mean by the in the best possible way. But with this wine, we're going to try and represent what I think is true Sauvignon Blanc sort of flavors and flavor profiles. We're not chasing volatile files or trying to make a certain style. It really is we take these grapes to their optimal ripeness and treat it as sort of conservatively in the cellar as possible. It's half of the grapes are whole bunch pressed, straight to barrel. Fermentation and maturation all happens in barrel on the gross lees. So very little racking and movement of this wine. Just trying to maintain the true terroir of the place. So yeah.
And for those of you whom wine speak is maybe not always your natural language, what Justin is saying is they go together really nicely. And that is a cracking vintage. 13's got some competition, still a little way to go. Let's move on from 17, on a year, 2018.
Yes.
All right, give us wine number 3.
2018, yeah, wine number 3. This is our current vintage, and I think another cool vintage. 2018 was a really cool vintage. I definitely think 17 was warmer than 18, and you start getting, there's still a lot of that sort of primary fruit character, beautiful floral notes. I really like that sort of white blossom flower floral character.
Oh, it does have that lovely burst of summer to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit livelier.
And then, it's got that same, I keep saying it, but freshness, acidity, and depth.
And
I think.
they do dovetail beautifully, the Sauvignon and the
Yeah.
Semillon. I think certainly in the case of your estate, you've got the percentages just right, even if they are slightly dictated to you, because the formula you have, and I
Yeah.
don't say formula in a derisory way because it works for you,
Yeah.
it clearly just plugs in beautifully.
Yeah, I think while the wine is still young, you taste a lot of that Sauvignon Blanc character shining through, and I think as the wine ages, Semillon just has this ability to age phenomenally well. It really is a wine. You can drink it 10 years, 15 years later, and it's a beautiful wine. And I think that's when you start, as the wine ages, you start picking up more of the Semillon character, and I think that's what makes this wine really charming. It just becomes more intricate with age, and I think I think that's sort of the beauty of. It's the beauty of making wine, actually, is that you can make something and still enjoy it 10 years, 15 years later. And you're able to, when you taste it, you are able to reminisce what that vintage was like and what happened. And sometimes it's just like, funny stories about the vintage, but you're able to remember that so much later because of tasting a wine. And I think that's the beauty of it.
I guess as a winemaker, it's almost a way of keeping a diary, because
It is.
you pull that out. Oh, that was 2016. I remember when.
Exactly. It is. It certainly is. I mean, you remember 2016. I remember, you just mentioned it as the vintage where it was one of the hottest vintages in Constantia. The heat that we're not used to in Constantia, and here we also had a bumper crop in that vintage. It was a phenomenal crop, and phenomenal quality. But I mean, we were fermenting grapes in any vessel I could possibly find in the cellar, because we weren't used to that volume. So yeah, it's just every vintage has a different story, and memories and interns that come and help us for harvest. For certain vintages, so, with every vintage you remember the intern you had, and so there's a lot to it. Yeah.
What about the approach to making the wine, in that you've got wine that it's a commercial endeavour, you need to sell it, and especially in South Africa we tend to find that already there are, especially in Johannesburg, lots of people who in March are very upset that they don't have their 2021 Sauvignon Blancs yet. So you've got to sell wine
Yes.
pretty early on, but at the same time, as we've seen from the 17, from the 13, wine that stays on builds up a particular magic to it. How do you strike that balance? How does your approach allow you to make wine we can drink today but also drink in 10 years' time?
I suppose we also make a Sauvignon Blanc.
Fair enough.
We make a Sauvignon Blanc and this, but no, even our Sauvignon Blanc, we keep that on the lees for 6 months. We have a second range of wines, so we don't only have our Constantia Glen range. We have a second range of wines called Constantia Saddle, and bottled under screw cap and made for earlier consumption. So we sort of strike that balance by having an entire second range of wines, and yeah, I mean we're very fortunate. I think all Sauvignon Blanc producers are very fortunate that consumers want to drink those wines early. It really suits us very well, especially Sauvignon Blanc. If you consider it hasn't gone through any oaking, it's all in stainless steel. It's I suppose that's why. Yeah, gosh. The 2021 Sauvignon Blanc, has one hit the shelves yet? I mean, it's already the 3rd of March.
Delan must have one out by now. Must have one.
It's
possibly even their 2022.
In this vintage, I think it'd be challenging, but maybe the end of March, we'll see. We'll see. There's always a sort of race for who's got the first one on the shelf. I think the way we sell wine mainly through our tasting room. We got a fantastic facility here. We can seat 300 people, and I suppose when people visit the farm and they're able to have the experience, and they're able to have our staff explaining the sort of the winemaking process, and how much goes into it, there's an appreciation for the wine, and that certainly helps. So so I suppose we rely on selling quite a bit off the property. Yeah.
Well, people who do come to this magnificent tasting venue, if they are trying the two, will, in the next little while, I'd imagine, be able to
Yes.
start sampling the 2019,
Absolutely.
which is ancient by Sauvignon Blanc standards, but yeah,
Yeah.
perfectly timed. 2019.
Yeah, so we've obviously just releasing this. It's not even at the tasting room right now, but it will be soon. Ancient by Sauvignon Blanc standards, but I think for this style of wine, yeah, completely youthful. You know, that's why we specifically call this a Constantia white blend. Yeah, it's actually
Lovely richness to this,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, 2019. Oh man, 2019 was another spectacular vintage for whites in particular, for the Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. You know, I've seen it all over in the valley. You know, I've got good friends of mine who are winemakers. Bulla's, you know, Sauvignon Blanc 2019 won the best in the world last year. And I think, yeah, it was just a spectacular vintage for Sauvignon Blanc. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's richness and texture combined with a real sort of, yeah, good aromatics.
And what's that sort of smooth, ever so slightly waxy finish, some lovely zest. Oh. It does stand out a little from the other three. Is
Yeah.
that just the youth?
No. 2019, yeah, it's a blockbuster vintage. It's great.
Right. It's a blockbuster vintage in the hands of a blockbuster winemaker, which affords you this library of wine, and you know, I suppose it's similar to the diary that allows you to keep as a winemaker. It also gives the estate the chance to showcase the journey that you've been on through the vineyards and this array of wine, and how it reflects the different years, the different seasons, the different challenges that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. And every vintage has its challenges. You know, even a spectacular vintage, there'll always be a challenge along the way. But we really believe in this style of wine. We've just planted an additional half a hectare of semillon, well, just about 3 or 4 years ago. So, you know, we got to keep the vineyards healthy. You know, one of the challenges with Sauvignon Blanc in Constantia is a disease called dieback, or which is caused by a wood fungus called Eutypa lata. And Eutypa seems to love Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon vines, and so that's one of the challenges. Is sort of adjusting our pruning methods, making sure we can, because the vineyards there at Constantia Glen were planted in 2000, so roughly 20 years old now, and so now the challenge is keeping those vines healthy so that we can really reap the rewards of older vines. Yeah.
One final question for you before we nip inside and go and do a little red wine tasting to wrap up. I don't know if I need any though, because these whites are great. No, it's these whites I want to ask you about. One bottle that you're allowed to pick from your cellar, from your entire collection of this range of two for one grand dinner. You've got Dan coming round for a massive evening out. What for you means the most to you as a bottle?
I think the sort of memories that bottle will invoke, and you know, I always try and choose a bottle that, you know, if I've got you coming around in 4 years' time, I would definitely, you know, pull out this 2019 because it was a memorable wine for you. And I think that is always important for me. Yeah, and I think the other day I had a bottle that Matt brought over to my house, and it was the 2008 Belfond Belsier, which him and I did together in France in 2008, and I hadn't had that wine for a good 10 years. And yeah, and he just brought the bottle, and I think that's always so special to me because it just brings back all those memories, and I think that's really, yeah, that's what it's about.
It is the core of wine's enchantment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bringing us together and allowing us to share memories.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, well, we've created some great memories for Dan Only Likes Wine today, Justin, so thank you. Thank you for showcasing this mini vertical of the Constantia 2. You'll notice as you look on the bottle that there are now Americans who are buying this, which is why they had to write Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon on the label, just to explain to them that that is why it is 2. We've got 4 and 4 lovely ones. Thank you for these, and I will definitely be back, hopefully sooner than 4 years' time, but can't wait to see where this 19 goes in particular. But also thank you for not just showcasing great wine, but also reminding us that keeping South African white wine is generally a pretty good thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
So there we go, from the magnificent surrounds that are Constantia Glen in the Constantia Valley, not quite a stone's throw, but maybe a couple of drivers, 3 freewoods and a 4-iron, from where I used to call home, a nostalgic visit accompanied by some fabulous wine from Constantia Glen.